Greetings and welcome to Pinball Help. Mike here. Today I'm going to do another episode of what I call Pinball Philosophy, where I kind of just ramble about pinball related subjects and hope somebody out there in the internets might find it interesting. And today's subject is are pinball rule sets getting just too complicated? Are they getting out of hand? Is it just too much? You know, I mean, they're getting so deep, they're getting so complicated. Uh, is this good or bad? Let's talk about it. Now, the game that I've got featured here is Godzilla, which I think is a great example. I love this game, but this game's rule set is insane. It's got so much stuff going on, and it may not even be the deepest rule set of any pinball machine, but it's a great representation because this is one of the most popular games that's out there right now. And it's very well loved. But what does that mean in terms of where pinball is going? Are these games just getting so complicated now that that might be detracting from the joy of playing? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it, and I want to hear your comments too in the comment section. You let me know what you think. I think this is a good discussion. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of pinball and how it kind of evolved. Originally it was just these mechanical tabletop games where you'd shoot a ball into like a little cup where there was pins and it was 300 points or whatever, and you added it up. It's always been about scoring points. But the early days, there was a lot of skill involved when it got to where there was flippers and there was things like that to differentiate it from a gambling machine. So it was a game of skill. And the rule set of basically how you play the game, how you score the points, was relatively straightforward. You didn't need to do any studying to step up to a pinball machine. You just put your money in and you saw the blinky stuff and you either put the lights out or you put them on, or if it was flashing, you shot at it, right? And, depending upon the game, the more things were blinking and crazy, the more, you were doing better, and the score reflected that. And there were just not a lot of game dynamics. Usually it was just score as many points, and there would be an objective or two that was fairly well spelled out. Like you would actually see on the play field, shoot all drop targets for 5,000 points, And so you could kind of see as you were playing, here's what my objective is. Then the concept of bonus came about, where you would shoot and you would rack up this extra score that you would get after your ball. And then there were some other things that you could do to make that a double bonus or a triple bonus, right? And it was almost always spelled out on the game. You knew what to shoot for. It was fairly straightforward. You could take your raw pinball skill and you could move from one machine to another and transfer that and be able to play well. If you were a good player, you could go to a new machine that you weren't that familiar with and you could still have a good chance. Now, there was always going to be tricks and tips that were specific to the machine, but they weren't the lion's share of what allowed you to win and do well in competition with these earlier games. Raw skill and the ability to have ball control was always very important. But now you enter the late 20th century and the early 21st century with these super complicated games that have just gotten so elaborate. Probably the key to doing well on these games is studying the rule set, is knowing what to do. So this game comes into our club. Everybody is playing it. And, sometimes people score really big, sometimes they don't. We're all just kind of discovering it, right? This happened for months. And, a lot of our people and a lot of pinball players, they don't really want to read up on stuff. It's not, this is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be fun, and so they kind of don't want to be in a class to learn how to do right on the pinball. They just want to have fun. But unfortunately, with these new games, you actually have to study. And obviously the pros take it even several levels more seriously, down to where they know the idiosyncrasies of the games based on the version of the code and stuff. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I will talk about how pinball originally has kind of morphed and evolved over time from a game that was about skill to a game that's now about knowledge. Knowledge is real power in these modern games, knowing what to shoot for and when to shoot for it. So I'll give you some examples because Godzilla is one of these games where you could be a great player, but if you don't know what to shoot for at what points, you can't do nearly as well. And this is a game where once I learned some of the idiosyncrasies of the rule set, I could kick everybody's ass. Now, I would still have good games and bad games, but when I had a good game, my score was exponentially more than other people who might be playing at the same level because I knew what to shoot for. What happens with this is that if you're in any kind of competition, whether it's friendly or professional, and you don't know those idiosyncrasies of the rule set, you're at an incredible disadvantage. You could argue everybody in the upper echelon of competitive pinball, that's their job. They know all this stuff. But it also creates slightly an unfair environment where if you don't have one of these in your house, if you don't have access to one where you can play it and play it and play it and really get deep into it, you're never going to do as well as somebody who does have that special access. We call that in the gaming world pay to play, pay to win, right? If you if you have enough money and you have enough resources, you can dramatically increase your chances of winning in competition. And that seems to be much more popular. If you reflect back to the old traditional games like basketball or chess, it wasn't like rich people had an advantage. Even the poorest person could have access to play basketball or to play chess. So it really was about whoever was the most skilled. And then we got into gamings and competitions where it really was having access to resources. Like if you look at something like the X Games, right, where these people doing these crazy tricks, they've got access to foam pits that they can launch their motorcycle in and, or for snowboarding. So even if you're a good snowboarder, you can't compete with somebody who's got their own ranch with their own custom-built ramps that they can practice on. Pinball is kind of like that too. In the competitive field, there are people that if they have the money to be able to get all the new games, bam, they are going to be at an advantage over the rest of us that have to maybe shove some quarters in to learn some of the new games if we don't have access to them. So there's a good argument for pinball has kind of evolved into kind of like a rich man's game competitively now because these rule sets have gotten so complicated. And if you don't know what you're shooting for, you can be, that's it. You won't do well. I'll give you an example. We recently had a tournament that involved the Godzilla game. It was fairly new and not a lot of people knew about it. Well, this particular game that I had a problem with the buttons inside the cabinet. They weren't working. This was a known problem with Stern, which, by the way, I reached out to them. They sent me a new set of buttons in the cabinet. Thank you, Stern. This is how you do it. When there's a defective part of your game, you make it good. I can't say that that same thing happens with other manufacturers. I'm not going to mention any names, but I think people know who I'm talking about. But anyway, I didn't have access to the switches in the coin door, so I couldn't put the game in tournament mode, but I didn't think it was really that much of a big deal. So the game's playing, and there's one of our guys who really is a great player and was pretty much predicted to kick everybody's butt. But some new guy shows up and just whips him. And this guy wasn't necessarily that better a player. But the guy that I knew that was predicted to win, he said, I think the problem was we didn't have it in tournament mode and he got some kind of random award that awarded him an extra ball. That was kind of the assumption, right? Well, the more I learned about this game, the more I realized that wasn't it. It wasn't that the game was not in tournament mode and you lost. The reason is because there's like a half a dozen ways to get extra balls in this game, but if you don't know where they are, then, that's it. You can't, you're not going to really do well. And that is a problem. So, let me give you an example. In this game, you have all kinds of skill trees. You've got you've got jets where there's a section where there's these red shots that you shoot, and every time you shoot one, you destroy a jet fighter. The pop bumper here is a flying saucer. The more hits to the pop bumper, the more saucers you destroy, right? Well, there's nothing here that says on the playfield, destroy 3 saucers and you get an extra ball. There's nothing around here that says, destroy 10 jets and you get an extra ball. And you may not even, and I don't even think there's anything on the screen. It may scroll across in some obscure little tutorial that flies by that nobody notices. But this game has all kinds of little things like that where if you don't know how to shoot and what to shoot, you're really at a serious advantage, no matter how good a player you are, no matter how many times you've even played the game, if you don't know the rule set. So I'm not saying I don't like the way things are going or that I don't like very deep rule sets. In fact, I've always been a champion of really deep, complicated rule sets, especially ones that give you all kinds of options. Like you don't have to play the game in one linear way. There's a lot of games like that where there's only one way to really play. You got to get this, and then you cash that in and blah. These newer games where you can stack the modes give you a lot of strategy in a lot of different ways, especially these Keith Elwin games. Keith is a real student of pinball, and he really appreciates the nature of how it is, and he goes out of his way to try to make the games as balanced as possible. But at the same time, he's also one of the best players in the world, and he's probably quite bored with traditional rule sets that are shallow, you know? So his games are super complicated, and it also doesn't help that I believe I talked with Gary Stern when he was last in town, and I asked him, what percentage of games are going into homes versus which ones are going, into on location, and I think he told me it was about 70%. So when you've got that many games that are actually going into people's houses, that's probably going to be an issue as well. And you want them to be deep because you don't want people to get tired of these games. And that's kind of, I think, what we're seeing. There's a lot of different causes and effects for this. But I also want to talk about people that are going to, to all you designers out there that are going to be doing these games, remember, the more complicated it is, unless you want it to be a game where people have to spend the night before reading through 37 pages of rules, you got to make the game a little bit more approachable. Obviously now, with digitized voices and speech, the game can talk back to you. We need to see more games that are telling you what to shoot for, not just shoot the scoop, shoot the scoop. It could be, saucer destroyed, 3 more for extra ball. Stuff like that where if somebody doesn't really know the rule set in depth, or doesn't know, for example, you're running 0.98, which awards the extra ball at 3 saucers, whereas 0.1.04 awards the extra ball at 4 saucers, or maybe somebody has changed the setting and configuration, the game needs to be able to give you that kind of feedback. So I really love that the rule sets are getting complicated, but I also think in some ways they might just be getting a little too complicated, and that can be causing problems. But I do think technologically you can compensate for it. I'll give you an example. On this game, on Godzilla, you've got all these different skill trees. There's jets, and there's the power line thing, and then there's tanks. There's all these different things that you can progress in. It's just like Iron Maiden and just about any other pinball machine. There's going to be different objectives on the playfield, and you get to go further and further. Traditionally, there was always extra lights, right? There might be 4 lights, and if you got 2 of them lit, you're halfway to whatever your objective is. But nowadays, there's so many levels, they can't put enough lights there. So what they're doing is they're having some of the lights are color coded. So if you don't know that pink means you're 20% and blue means you're 40% of the way, then you're at a disadvantage. This is where the screen up there comes in really, really handy when you can, when you can actually display all of the status of what's going on the screen. This is where I think Godzilla is a little bit weak. I think there needs to be more use of the video screen to give you a little bit more information. Some games are better or worse at this. Some games do it cleverly, but I want to see more of that, and I want to see a way a way of keeping the screen up longer, because oftentimes when you're playing a game, you got the ball trapped. You want to see how far you are in a certain mode, so you hold the flippers and you keep hitting them until you get to the screen that shows you the information. Then you stop, and it's there for 2 seconds, and then it's gone again, and then you got to start all over. There's got to be a better way to do that. Maybe even with the prices we're paying, putting another little LCD in the apron, which lists, more stuff like that. That would be kind of cool. Not that I want to make games any more complicated, but let me know what you think. Do you think these games are just getting too complicated for their own good? Is it squeezing some of the fun out? Do you think it's making competitive pinball more about whoever has the most resources and not the most skill? Let me know in the comments, and let's get a dialogue on this. That being said, I'm not complaining. I love these super deep rule sets, but sometimes I feel like I'm overwhelmed with options and choices, and I don't always know clearly what to do. And I want to see future evolution of pinball. It can stay complicated, but it's got to be a little bit simpler to approach, I think. And also, I want to say one last thing. We don't always have to have everything super complicated. If you look at a game like Total Nuclear Annihilation, that game is super shallow in terms of these modern games, and it's very, very beloved. So I think you don't have to make a rule set monstrously deep to make a good pinball game. But let me know what you think, and we'll continue this dialogue. So until next time, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you don't mind.